Okay, welcome all you citizens of the world. It's Michael James, another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This is for the week of September 14th, and we are recording it on an infamous day, Wednesday, September 11th. I'm glad to have two of my favorite political people, good friends, Thom Clark and Katy Hogan, joining me. We're going to talk about the debate, which we all watched last night. And then a little bit later on the second portion of the show, I'm going to have Doy Gorton and Jane Addams talking about their new book, The White Mississippi. Stay tuned. We're going to have a lot of good discussion for the next hour here on the show. And whether you're getting it on radio, on YouTube, on CAN TV, we hope you enjoy it. So let me say good morning to you two. I know that we all watched the debate last night. Been a lot of buildup for the last week or two or longer. And we had it. And I'm going to ask each of you what your initial reaction was to the debate. I myself was pretty worried at first when Kamala Harris was asked about the economy and went off into a long kind of ramble. I thought, oh, no. And then the other guy followed up with something that was really terrible. So the air sort of lifted. Things just got better and better from my point of view. How about you, Thom?
Well, the vice president showed her prosecutor chops, and she was clearly well coached on creating several rabbit holes that Trump just very quickly jumped down every single last one. And I thought it was a pretty masterful performance. Can't really think of any major slip-ups. Do I agree with everything she had to say? And we're kind of back to a Cold War framing on some of our international issues. But she has something to say about it. And Trump, what does he want? The dictator of Eastern Europe. Anyway, it was grueling to watch because he's so off the rails. And I think we had better moderation. We can talk about the media later if you want. Katy, what did you think?
Well, Thom, I also was a little nervous before, Michael, like you. But I think it was Jon Stewart I saw who said it later. Once the first question was asked, which is, are you better off economically this year than you were 4 years ago? And neither of them actually answered it. I knew we were back in familiar territory.
Yeah.
We'll just say what we want, no matter what you ask.
Yep.
As a person who needs to win votes for our side, I was very pleased that, one, that she came across and forced him to shake her hand, the fool. Oh, my God. That was an amazing first step.
Didn't know what to do about it.
No, it's I don't know how to be a normal human being who shakes hands before
greeting people on the street. Oh.
Anyway, I thought she was great. I thought the way she looked at him consistently when he could not ever take his eyes off of straight ahead had power. And yeah, clearly, Thom, he did take every opportunity. I mean, when she mentioned his rallies, oh my God, his favorite thing to lie about, out of the many that he lies about, I think she did the best job possible of making him look as he is. But I have to say, I am impressed by how doggedly he holds on to his craziness. He never veered. He just continually went, oh, no. And he never.
I realized halfway through, particularly after she delivered the line about 83 million people fired you, that he thinks he's still on a reality show, Apprentice-like, and doesn't have a clue about reality around him. So all he has to fall back on are his memes.
I have been at the door, and I had a woman tell me the thing about, okay, did you hear the new rule they passed in California? At which point that whole phrase just made me go, okay, brace yourself, Kate.
Yep.
And it was that the new law was allowing doctors to kill babies up to 28 days after they're born. At which point, because I had talked to this Trump supporter at that point for about 5 minutes, she believed me when I said, look at me, fellow American. No fellow American would allow that law to be passed. That is complete and utter nonsense. And then the other thing I said to her, which I recommend sharing with any Trump supporter you see, I would look more at the person who thought you would be so gullible as to believe that kind of garbage, which did give her pause.
Mm-hmm.
I had never really gone down the rabbit hole of migrants eating cats and dogs, but I think she handled that well. And I also think David Muir handled that well when he said, thank you, there are no pets being eaten.
I thought that the ABC hosts were really good. And, I watch them once in a while on TV. Around our house here, tend to be watching NBC at news, but I really was very impressed with the two hosts from ABC and how they very diplomatically kind of handled his transgressions regarding reality. They would say, like around the FBI and the crime is down, crime is not up. The thing about the babies, they were good.
But you'll note that in the power dynamics of that stage, Trump would only address the male moderator by his first name, never addressed the female moderator, and never looked at the vice president, except when he was forced to with the opening handshake. I mean, this guy really is in a fragile bubble of his own making, and it was really apparent as people with some normalcy and common sense try to gently persuade him that no, that's not quite the way it is.
I like when he had to call IVF fertilization, like he was talking about a soybean field. I mean, really, what the heck? He said it twice. He's like, fertilization. I don't know what this means.
The moderators were taken aback. There was a quick shot of them as he was doing that. I found myself, and we talked about it in our living room because my household has heard this before. I'm still waiting for a reporter to ask him how many abortions he's paid or arranged for.
That's rude. That's just plain rude. And we don't have to be rude, even though people that we're being rude to are the quintessence of rudeness.
Which is why I know it will never be asked.
It's not fair. Sorry?
Which is why I know it will never be asked, fortunately.
Yeah.
What was your sense? I know you both were devouring the news afterwards and this morning.
I haven't watched any news this morning.
Well, I'm just wondering what people's thoughts were on the reactions to it. I mean, the Democrats are blissed out. And, after the last debate with the president going up against Trump, we were really kind of in shock. And, as much as we had the hype and the lead in that Harris was really good, she was going to handle him and all that, we didn't know what was going to happen. And then we came out of watching it pretty happy. I noticed that people like Josh Hawley from Missouri, senator, he questioned the accuracy of some of the, what she said, and said, where's the fact checking? But by and large, even Republican operatives were said that she had the upper hand, that she did much better than he did, even though they tried to cover it up.
Well, first of all, never quote Josh Hawley. He's crazy.
Well, I just like him so much that I like to point out whenever he's full of it.
Yeah, I mean, of course he's going to say something like that. I think that also, like Thom, I am not just between us and the three people watching this. I'm not a fan of some of her stands, to be honest. You know,
Yeah,
every time she uses the word lethal force, it just makes me cringe.
Well, that was going to be my next question to you all was, I have a few things down here, but one of the things has been the kind of suck it up, swallow, don't pay attention to the blatant move to the center, even to the right by the Democrats. I mean, we kind of are justifying stuff, Biden's harder position on the border and asylums. And certainly Harris, she tries to distinguish herself around the war in Gaza, but a little bit overly supportive of Israel from my point of view. And in general, and the patriotism we saw at the convention, I mean, the Democrats are really going for the center right now. And I think a lot of progressives, some of them would be very critical. We even think that our Harris Wall sign that was ripped off in the front of our house was done perhaps by someone from the ultra left and not the right. The Democrats have definitely moved to the center, and a lot of us are just sort of going along with it so that we can win the election. And then we get to do our shout outs, our demonstrations, our protests.
Okay, a little history here. The left has always gone along because by the time someone gets to be a presidential candidate, they are no longer left. Okay, so it's just the way it is. But I'm not shy about saying it. I'm not, blowing the horn to the rafters while I'm campaigning for her. But it's also like at any point I can say, look, I'd vote for a tomato over that guy. All right, so that's once November 5th has come and gone, and we've released the world from the grips of another few years of chaos. Then we get to turn to her and say, what are you talking about? No fracking. What are you talking about? Lethal force. And why can't you have someone representing the Palestinian cause talk at that lovely little convention party you had? I mean, all of that stuff will come burbling out. I mean, this is part of why we must continue to support people like Brian Derrick's Oath and others who are very specifically targeting the red to blue possibilities down ballot from sea to shining sea, because we need the trifecta big time. And because she will not turn all of a sudden to the left once she's elected.
Katie's making a really important point, which is that it's apparently is still a tight election. And I'm beyond trying to understand the former president's base, except we know there's 35% there that just will do anything that he does. We are fighting for the middle. And if I learned way back to McGovern anything about going for the person you feel great about in your heart versus who can win, this is a critical moment where we need to win, and not just the White House, but those down ballot elections, because getting the House and Senate is critical, even if it's a narrow one. But a narrow one we'll learn to live with, and try to make some stuff happen with President Harris.
I think there's a former Trump ally, Scaramucci. Is that his name? I saw him. Basically, he predicted yesterday on MSNBC, I believe, that he thought that her numbers and her popularity would go up after the debate. And I'm wondering if that's true. I think that she probably scored pretty heavily favorable, positive, reached a lot of people. And I do think that she's going to move ahead in the polls. I don't know what you guys think, but I think that's what's happening.
We pay far too much attention to the polls because it's inexpensive so-called journalism. And it's a reference point about what people were thinking about yesterday. So we need to be doing everything we can to turn out the vote. We're doing a postcard party Friday night, and we have more people signing up than, quite frankly, we thought we'd have. I understand that's your experience with Operation Swing State, Katy, is that you're sending a lot of people up to Wisconsin to try to make sure that we get that state. Can you talk a little bit more about where people can plug in?
Thanks for the commercial break there, Thom. OperationSwingState.com, no caps, one word. OperationSwingState.com is the place I'm working for, and also the place that has organized a huge amount of partners, which include Indivisible, which include all the smaller Democratic organizations around the north side and north suburbs. And Swing Left is part of it. Between us all, we've knocked 12,000 doors in Wisconsin. I don't have the number for Michigan, but a slightly lower because more people from this end of the state go to Wisconsin as it's easier. But there are multiple canvases every single weekend. We can turn you into a canvasser, even if you've never done it. And it's no time like the present. This is a great and interesting, every campaign is different in my vast experience of campaigns. And this one holds true. I've never seen so many volunteers pouring out of the woodwork from the last, certainly since Biden stepped down, that was a big increase, but there were already lots of volunteers. So our job is to put them to work and make sure that that volunteer energy goes beyond this one time. So a lot of training is happening on the road as we drive up to Wisconsin, a lot of how to do your best at the door, which is always part of my job in these campaigns. And it's really, really great when the door opens and there is someone who actually thinks they're supporting Trump. That's my favorite moment because one, they're never rude. Just surprise, surprise. They never slam the door. I've not had one slammed door this time, although I wouldn't be surprised or put off by it. To just make a human connection with a fellow American who has been told that we are the enemy is a really good thing with one guy. And the other thing is there are divided households, just like there were when Obama first ran. And so, we recognize that. And when I go up to a door and it's the two women in the house that I'm supposed to be talking to, and a man answers the door, I ask for the women. In this case, they were both out. So I said, well, how about if you and I talk? And he said, well, I'm not going for your guy because I usually hold up the literature just to jump to the case. And I said, yeah, I could tell. And, we talked a little bit about policing and stuff like that. And finally, and this was in Racine, I think, finally, it had been a blistering hot day and there was absolutely no shade in the area that we walked. So we would walk, to get to shade in order to enter our stuff on minivan. Anyway, I finally said to him, hey, what's with the no trees here? And talking about that, he chuckled and he said, we planted those two. See out there, we planted those and it's against the law because it's on the parkway. And I said, yeah, that's the law in our city too. And I, fist bumped him. I said, like your style, buddy. And that's how we left it. So, I think that's Americans need to talk to one another. And when we get out of our little blue bubble here in Rogers Park, Chicago, Cook County, state of Illinois, there's a whole world out there. Sorry, Michael, you were trying to.
No, I was just going to say, I'm just going to go back to the debate last night. And one of the things was, I wasn't sophisticated enough to know all the kind of ways that she tricked him into responding and kind of fooled him. But I was impressed with her comments about Ukraine and if Putin was able to take over Ukraine, he could move on Poland, and then she raised to the 800,000 Polish people in the state of Pennsylvania, that issue, and hopefully that they would side with Harris over the Ukraine war.
That was a brilliant move. That was well done. Really well
She
done.
covered a breadth of issues while introducing herself to a lot of people. I don't know how many on the fence voters had, convincing evidence from either campaign off of last night, except she really came across as well prepared. She showed facility with two hot spots in the world, even if we don't quite agree where she came out on the side of lethal force. But and all Trump could come up with was his favorite dictator from Hungary. I mean, it just
I know. I mean,
yeah,
really,
absolutely. His aides, those who are left, what is it, 63 cabinet members and top executives from his administration who would never work for him again, and most are voting for Kamala. I mean, it was an amazingly futile effort on the part of the former president.
Yeah, and in case you had any wonder about who would be okay with her after the debate was over, hearing that Dick Cheney is now voting for the same person I am was a little disheartening, to tell you honest. But there you go.
It is quite something else that you have all these Republicans turning on their guy, particularly the ones that know him best. And we'll see how that manifests itself out in the world. What do you all think should be, besides the knocking on doors and talking to our friends, what are things people ought to be paying attention to and doing and encouraging direction of in the remaining days before the big election?
Register to vote. Make sure you're registered. Vote early, like the first day of early voting would be great. If people need to have a mail-in ballot, it's time now for them to mail their application in for that ballot, unless they're on the regular, they always mail it to me list. And at this point, it's to continue to keep the energy high, because we can remind people the polls said that Hillary was going to win right up until the day before she didn't. So just full steam ahead. Make it as if she's running against, Genghis Khan, because she sort of is. Don't stop until we get past the tape.
I'm looking forward to the story that has a reporter, or a team of reporters following Taylor Swift going door to door to turn out the vote.
Well, wasn't that something else? Talk about an accidental timing. I'm sure it wasn't.
No, she's smart.
Right after, as soon as the debate was over, Taylor Swift comes out in support of Kamala, and bingo, this is a good one. She has billions in followers, apparently. One thing I noticed was an article somewhere, probably in the Washington Post, about people who were undecided in swing states. And I think they had about 20 some odd quotes from people who were pro Harris and about 2 or 3 from pro Trump. So we don't know how the swing states are going. They're the key, apparently, still. We've got to deal with Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina now. I think our opportunities have improved since yesterday. And with that said, I'll give you each about 30 seconds if you have any summing up you'd like to share with the masses of listeners.
I'm leaving here and going and registering the staff and clients at Trilogy. That's my 15 seconds.
Right on. How about you, Thom?
Vote early. Make sure others vote often. And we got to have every last couch potato show up this time, because their votes will really count.
Well, okay. I want to thank you for coming on and chewing the fat, so to speak, with me about the great debate last night. It's a historic moment in our history. We are looking forward with enthusiasm to the days ahead until we elect our next president. And it very hopefully will be the first woman president we've ever had. So I want to thank you all for joining me, Thom and Katy both. It's always good to have you back on the set here at the Heartland show. And everyone else, stay tuned. We'll be back after a musical break with our next guests, Doy Gorton and Jane Addams. We're going to talk about White Mississippi, a new book that they have out. Welcome back, all you citizens of the world. It's Michael James and the Live from the Heartland show for the week of September 14th in the year 2024. And I've got two old friends coming on now, Doy Gorton and Jane Addams, and they were last on when we went via Zoom down to Southern Illinois, and they talked about politics down in Southern Illinois and abortion and things that were going on currently. Today, we're going to take a little step back in time because Doy and Jane have a new book out called White South, and it is a beautiful book of photographs from very specific time in history, 1969, 1970. Doy had been involved with not only SDS, but with Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And he grew up in Mississippi in the Delta. He went to the University of Mississippi. He was appalled by some of the racial stuff that was going on and went on to be one hell of a photographer, worked for Life magazine. Jane, on the other hand, I met her in the SDS office on West Madison when she was the national secretary of SDS. And I'm really glad to have both of you on today. So hello to you down there in Southern Illinois.
And don't forget, Mike, we're married. I actually was able to marry this woman. It took a lot of work.
But you didn't take your last name? What kind of deal is this? Women's liberation or what?
She's a feminist. I didn't take her last name either, but you'd be surprised who calls me by her last name. We go to city council meetings and they'll say, Mr. Adams, talking about me.
That's because she was on the city council in Carbondale, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
Well, how about one of you tell us about this book, how it came to be? It's a beautiful book of photographs of Mississippi. It includes some, two pictures of drag races that I really got into. And it turns out both Doy and I had 40 Fords and we're into hot rod cars. The book is something else. And it goes to Parchment Farm. It goes to cotton gins. It shows debutante balls, all that kind of stuff. And I assume that Jane did some of the writing.
Yeah.
He took the photographs. Tell us about this book.
Well, Jane, you want me to go first and say something? Or what?
Absolutely. It's your work that you have nurtured.
Just photos. Go for it, Doy.
Okay. Michael, you got my background right, but what happened inside of SDS and SNCC was that it was like a university, like it was a postgraduate university of learning about things. And there weren't many people in the United States who were involved in that. We're talking about meeting folks who were coming out from being gay and the whole question of gay liberation. Meeting women who were writing the original writings on women's liberation, that we called it back in those days. So we had knowledge of an emerging world, a world that was just at that point coming out in 1965 and 1966 when you and I were traveling together. Later on, SNCC, well, actually during that same period, SNCC said, listen, if you want to be involved with the community and organizing, go back to your own community, which is the white community for me, and take a look at your people. Don't try to organize us. We'll take care of that. We need your help. No problem. We're not mad, but go take a look. That became the fundamental reason that I went back. And I spent almost a year in the South on a book contract from E.P. Dutton, along with Jeff Sharrow, who was an old friend of mine, had been a vice president of SDS. To photograph the White South. It wasn't just Mississippi, though it was centered in the Delta where I grew up. I grew up in Greenville. But it was also went across to Alabama, to Georgia, up into the Carolinas and around into Louisiana. And it was it was not what you'd call a road trip. That's what Robert Frank's book was a road trip. It was closer to what Walker Evans did in his photography, which was more like a set pieces where you'd go someplace, you'd look at something within the South, or in this case, the FSA, and photograph it. So I did that, and the book was never published. The editor dropped dead. He died tragically at a very young age. And the photographs, the negatives, just stayed with me as I moved on around. I became a photographer. I went on, a professional. I went on, became chief photographer of the Philadelphia Inquirer. And then I went on to the New York Times and became the White House photographer for the Times, and during the Carter and Reagan administrations. So my book, those photographs, go all the way back. They are authentic. There's nothing you can change about them. They're not digital images. They're good old-fashioned silver images. So that this is going to be important in our discussion as we talk about the authenticity of photographs and what we call evidence inside of photography. Jane wrote the essay. She's a trained professor. You can speak for yourself, Jane.
Okay. Well, I found the collection really exciting. Dee and I have done a lot of research together since we got together in the late 1990s. And we've done a lot of research in the Delta. And photography, I always saw photography as documenting what's out there. I always loved photography. I'm not a photographer, though I take pictures, but I use them as data. I simply use them. So these photographs that give us in many ways, the way the Farm Security Administration photographs give us a window into a past that is no longer accessible to most people. Some of us who are our age have real recollections, but anybody who's like 15, 20 years younger than us, it's a foreign land. And to understand it, and the history has gotten really flattened. The history is there are all these knuckle-dragging white racists down in the South, and then there were the blacks who went and did liberation. And the complexity of the relationships between black and white and the codes that kept the relations relatively peaceful, except when they went to the boundaries. And the underlying kind of ethos that prevented a true bloodbath, which everybody expected, those things are visible if you're knowledgeable and if you're asking the right questions in these photographs. You can see the nature of the relationships. He went to those places that were where they really defined the boundaries of what was acceptable. The Parchment Prison, and he photographed both blacks and whites in Parchment. And then at Whitfield, which by the time he got there had been very quietly, which was the mental hospital. And that had been integrated very quietly by the time he got there.
Dee, let me ask you, how many photos are in the book?
I think it's around 110. The book changed from a kind of a Robert Frank type minimalist book of photographs, like 50 photographs, white pages, no captions, into this full-blown complex text and photograph thing as we worked on it for almost 4 years, I guess. The concept inside of it is to try to understand this period, which was the last days, literally the last days of legal white supremacy, where the laws were shifting and changing as I was shooting per week. So every photograph you see in here is also during that period. This is the last people, who lived under white supremacy. But when you see their relationships with black people, the interchanging relationships in the photographs, and we can easily show you in these pictures how they work. The codes, what we call codes, you can see the kind of hidden effects of white supremacy, how that took place with black people. An example would be, if we look at the drag races, there's a photograph particularly of a drag racer, and directly behind him is a whole line of black young men. The two things you must notice about it is, one, The drag racers are just loosey-goosey, everybody's happy. And behind them are a group of black men, every one of whom has got their hands in their pockets. Every one of whom is dressed up neat as a pin. Everyone has got their mouths closed and they're just simply looking at the car. In other words, we're not dangerous. We're here in a mixed company, but don't worry about us. We're going to be okay, which is the sort of theory behind that. A lot of my black friends have looked at these photographs and, oh my God, yes, that's exactly what I do. I watch myself in public. I do these. So you see the results of what that life was like with white supremacy, with people under that kind of a regime. And when I grew up, if you went to Hushpupcana or if you went to Alligator, Mississippi or Indianola, each one of those towns, as you know, Michael, had different codes for the black people. In some towns, for instance, you could go and eat at the end of the lunch counter, but you had to be very far at the very end of the lunch counter. In some, you could only go in the back door. You couldn't go to the lunch counter if you were black to get food. All of those things were different. For instance, when I grew up, if you went into a room and you were black, like a lawyer's office, you could sit down. But if a white person came, you had to stand up and get out of the eye line, not just get out of the way, but out of the eye line of the white person who then was seated, and you had to remain standing. You couldn't sit down as well. Now you could squat, but you couldn't sit next to somebody, or you could stand in a circle, but you couldn't stand in line, one after the other. So all of these details like this were learned from birth, and they're still being passed down by people. When people talk about sort of hidden racism and so forth, what they're talking about are codes and ideas that were instilled during white supremacy that still come down to black folks and to white folks too. Whenever you feel like you're in danger around black people, they'll make sure you know you're not, because they put their hands in the pocket. We've got photographs of it over and over and over again. So that's one of the key things to learn inside of that there is, in fact, an extraordinary kind of a ballet, Jane, would you say, or some sort of a way of understanding the codes without anybody saying a word. It was like the fish in the sea. It was like the water you were in. That's it. If you didn't know how to do it, you weren't from around here and you were about to get busted. And that happened all together. Our civil rights people who went south, and you knew, Michael, you went down there. They used to
No,
get.
I didn't go. I never went south. I mean, I did go on a tour with the movement newspaper guys, and I remember meeting Fannie Lou Hamer in her backyard when she was doing the laundry over a kettle.
That's right.
Oh, I don't think she was glad to see us, but we were honored to make her acquaintance.
Yeah. That's my family was, and Rouville was where my family passed through. And my father was run out of Rouville because he refused to beat a black person one night when the Ku Klux came by the house. That's why it was what happened. And we were rescued. My family was rescued by a Jewish retailer and merchant in Greenville, Mississippi, which is right on the river there, who gave my father a job. So our background goes into all of that. My mother told stories forever, and it's in the book, about huge lynchings that took place around Rouville and up near that, along the Yazoo and Mississippi Railroad, which Rouville is on. Fannie Lou Hamer recruited me into the movement. I met her, and she'd been beaten up and so forth. We talked, and I decided I was going to be with SNCC. I put a note up on my door at Ole Miss because I'm stupid. And sure enough, the Ku Klux Klan came to the door looking for me. So that was another big wake-up call. You know, I was a son of privilege. I knew that. I escorted the debutantes. I was a member of Kappa. I was pledged to Kappa Alpha Order, which was a fraternity that Robert E. Lee was the spiritual head of. I knew all the moves, every one of them. And nobody could fool with me because I was part of that kind of privileged whites from the Delta. So even when I moved across the board there and became in opposition, you still didn't want to fool with me because I knew all this stuff, you know, the family, all those things. Unless you were extraordinarily privileged, you didn't screw with me. And
well, let me ask you about another photo, the one where they have the new technology at the cotton gin setup. And you have a good description of the people in that picture, too. And then after you do that, I want to tell people the name of the book and where they can read about it and how they could get it.
Jane, why don't you talk about that photograph? It's the one that really intrigues you, too.
Well, there's a photograph in the gin, and there's a man who is sort of in a uniform, dressed in a uniform, a white man, and he's giving instructions to the white man who will be operating the gin. All these new buttons and gadgets and things on the instrument panel. And then there's a young man there too, like a teenager, and he's standing there looking bored as he can be, rolling his eyes like, oh God, I gotta be here, not really paying attention. And then way in the background, there's a black man looking out, standing there, bent over, his arms akimbo, looking out the window, soaking everything up and listening. He's learning how to do it as well, but he's invisible. I mean, the three white men, he's not there. But he wants, what it looks like and what Dee experienced at the time was he wants to know what's going on with this new technology. He wants to know how it operates. And so you can see the various ranks and statuses of people, the expert who is sort of the boss, and the worker, the white worker, and then the kid, and then this black man. So
what he was doing was being invisible. Don't mind me. I'm okay. You haven't got to worry about me learning anything. I'm just going to look out the window over here. And his body language, you can see it. You'll see it in the photograph. It's extraordinary. I'm looking over here, and I'm becoming invisible. And I think that people actually have a lot of photographs that I have of people that you can see on the edge and the periphery of photographs who are becoming invisible. I've got pictures in Memphis, Tennessee during riots. All these white folks are standing on the sidewalk, and they're looking out this way. And here comes some black people along. We're not really here. We're just kind of walking real slow and getting past them and getting out of the way. It's extraordinary. And everybody understood it. As long as the signals were there, you're not threatening. If the signals were there, somebody was going to either, tell you to get out of the room or do something to you. It was a way in which small ways that people were controlled always and everywhere inside that society. But that's a society that broke up. It doesn't exist anymore in any kind of a formal way, but it still exists all over the place. And you can see it in these photographs, which is one of the reasons why they're relevant. The other reason is because it was time when society was upside down, much like we have right now. And you can see how people were responding to that. I've got George Wallace rallies and people inside of the Wallace thing. I've got people demonstrating against integration. All of those things, you see people moving in certain kinds of ways, which are very analogous, Jane and I believe, because we've been through both for old folks, are analogous to a lot of the things that we're seeing today. And particularly during the presidential election and during the changes in Congress and politics. So how does something 60 years old become relevant, which is the problem we started with when we began working on the book? It's by going through and carefully putting together things that dealt with codes, ideas, aspirations, politics, all of that. So Jane wrote, I don't know how many essays, Jane, 6 essays, 5 or 6 essays, including sexuality, which is another thing that people refuse to talk about, which was absolutely front and center inside of our world of the 1960s. I know you wouldn't know about that, Michael, but a lot of other people do.
So let me ask you, first of all,
Jane, you wouldn't know about it either.
Let me just say the book is called Doy Gorton's White South. And so you go by Dee and Doy. I just call you Dee.
Yeah.
And there's a great review of the book in Mississippi Today by W. Ralph Eubanks. And if you go to Mississippi Today and just then do a search for Dee Gorton or just Gorton, you'll find the article because there are some nice pictures. And what I want to ask you, Dee, is is there a favorite photograph from the book that we haven't seen of the two we've shown so far?
I don't know. I
and-
guess
And do you have or is there something that one event when you were taking a picture that stands out in your mind?
well, I don't know about the favorite photograph. We've been over them so many times. The cover photograph is the most significant one. It shows women at a fashion show and a Black woman who's serving them. And that relationship, that's the thing that I think is important to see. As far as what I went through, no, I photographed George Wallace at his rallies. And he would always pick me out. I had credentials in it for Newsweek magazine, so I could get into the rally. And there he is over there, that pointy-headed intellectual. He's out there. He's taking photographs, folks. Don't smile for him. Tell him to get out, like that. And then I turn on the TV and I watch a Trump rally. And God, the same thing's going on. I'm thinking,
Yeah.
oh, this has happened 60 years apart. Exactly the same kind of thing. So we're old folks, and so we're going to share our age with you and learn the things that we saw in the 60s and things that we're seeing right now. It's all in that book.
Let me ask both of you, I know you're living in Southern Illinois, which is a long way from Chicago, and it's closer to Mississippi probably. What's your sense of Mississippi today? I know we have one, maybe two Black congressional districts there now. I still don't get how many liberal white people there are in Mississippi. I have a stepfather, late great commercial artist, Euclid Shook. He's from Belmont, Mississippi. So, I got a little tie to Mississippi, and I've been through the state a few times, and I certainly have admired not only you, but also a lot of SNCC workers that I've met over the years. What's your sense of Mississippi today? Is there any hope?
We've done a lot of research down there since around 2000, over the past 20 years. And one of the things that we found was that the most integrated, completely integrated church, I went to a number of churches, was a Pentecostal church.
Yeah.
And it was completely integrated. And there is a photograph in the book, a couple photographs of a revival that took place on Nelson Street, which was the Black business street in Greenville, of a white preacher who was Pentecostal, who had an integrated revival, tent revival. And the people there were ecstatic, and you could almost feel them breaking these boundaries of race, which in 1969 were still really held in place.
The minister brought a Black man up to the stage and washed his feet.
Yes.
Minister, I've got photographs of that in the book.
So the class issues are still really powerful.
Right.
Which we haven't really touched on. He has a lot of pictures in the book that look to that class nature. And a lot of the white upper classes have made their peace and found ways to make prosperity inside of the new racial regime. So, it reads differently. It's a different, a lot of the codes have fallen away, but a lot of them endure. Both classes.
Let me take up on that part, because I think that's a good ending.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
A number of these photos are on the Fall Line Press website. If you just go to Fall Line Press, this book is featured, and a number of photographs are displayed there.
Well, Hal, you're going to have to look at those, grab some more. Go ahead, Dee.
Hey, a minute. When you and I were doing early in SDS and in SNCC and so forth, we were concerned about class and race. And photography that was really treasured was documentary photography. As you know, documentary photography now is no longer something that people are interested in. It's all a kind of a certain kind of a museum quality, kind of a inspirational stuff. We're not into that. This is documentary in the old-fashioned way that looks at class and caste in a Southern town. So that's what we've got here. It's an old-fashioned way that we're trying to make brand new. So see if we're successful or not.
I too am influenced by, Walker Evans and a whole lot of other people, Dorothea Lange, Marion Host
Right.
Walcott, and then someone that you don't mention, but you probably know. One of my favorite photographers is Danny Lyon.
Yeah, Danny started. I have started with Danny. I mean, he was one of my very first influences.
Well, I'm coming down there to Southern Illinois in the not too distant future.
Hey,
Hang out with you guys to get some lessons on how to use my various cameras and talk books and photography. I'm looking forward to it. And I want to thank both of you for joining us this morning on Live from the Heartland for the week of September 14th. And you will get a copy of this interview and visuals, and you can send it to all the photographer friends and others that you would like to.
Michael,
So-
thank you for inviting us on board. You're a dear old friend, and you're a good heart. You got a great
Okay, I
heart.
want to thank everybody who makes the show possible. Our engineer, Hal James, our first two guests, and our co-producers, Thom Clark and Katy Hogan, also Lynn Orman, and certainly Doy Gorton and Jane Addams. And we'll be back next week with another edition of Live from the Heartland. You all continue to do good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that all of us do together. So all power to the people. Have a great week.